My mother says I am not to play with you. What? She says you're a tag. But you know, I quite like you. Why do you remember the things that you do? Or more importantly, why do the people that you want to influence remember the things that they do? That is possibly the first story that I can recall as a 5-year-old visiting my cousins in Ballycastle, County Antrim, during the Old Lammas Fair. Now, I know what you're thinking. Eamonn, the reason that you remember that is you were deeply upset about the quite sectarian nature of that conversation. And she got the term wrong. No. All right, Eamonn, then the reason that you remember that is that she obviously liked the cut of your jib, and you thought that was quite exciting. No. 30 seconds later, she had a hold of my water pistol, and I never got it back. And I learned something really important that day. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And be careful who you give your things to. But something else happened that day. It upset me. I cared about it. And the upshot is I told people about it. In fact, it was probably one of the very first times that I ever told a story. Now here's the thing. Whether you are 5, 25, 55, 85, from cradle to grave, when you want to share meaning and feelings with others, what do? You tend to tell people stories. We love to hear stories. We love to share them. And in fact, they define who you are, how you interact with others, how you think of your future unfolding. But there's something else. So I told you a very short story, more of a vignette really. And I didn't tell you much. I did not tell you, for example, what that little girl looked like. I didn't tell you what kind of a day it was. I didn't tell you where we were, other than we were in Ballycastle. I didn't tell you what her mother looked like. Any chance that you filled in some blanks for me? You see, we tend to do that. And you see, what happens when we hear a story is that we tend to put ourselves into that picture. We tend to remember it. And if I ask you a week from now what happened to Eamonn when he was up in Ballycastle, there's a really good chance that you could tell me. Not necessarily exactly, but close enough. But something else would happen, and this really matters to you as a communicator. Whose version of events will it be? It will no longer be mine. It will be yours. You see, as a speaker, when you tell stories, you get to be like an athlete in a relay race. And I get to do this to you, and you, and you, and everyone who is in your audience. And because you have now taken possession of it, and you own it, you are more likely to remember what was said, to care about it, and maybe to do something about it. And that memory bit is really very important, because your ability to remember things is actually a lot less than you might imagine. The UCLA folks and other academics discovered something very interesting. It turns out that more than 99% of everything that you did, that you saw, that you experienced yesterday, and actually pretty much any day, you have likely already forgotten. As you were having a shower today, you probably weren't thinking, do you know, I wonder what 8 to 10 minutes I'll be bothered to remember today? Can I recommend these ones? Just saying. Actually, seriously, if you realized how little you remembered, you'd wonder why you bothered to get out of bed at all. Seriously. But the thing is that if that sounds bad, and it is, it's worse. Because information overload has reached epidemic levels. It is the worst in humankind. 4 years ago, if you worked in a service-type company and you were in the Western world, you were being hit with more information in a day than somebody would have seen in their lifetime in the Middle Ages. Today, those were the good old days. The internet has grown more than threefold in that time, and it continues to grow like topsy. And the upshot, ladies and gentlemen, is this is how you and I are functioning. We spend most of our days ignoring things. And for you as a communicator, that is a big issue. Because you need people to take their hands down mentally and physically so they actually hear what you say. They care about it and they remember it. Quick story to finish. My wife was so excited. She and others have been working on a kids' museum, and finally it was all systems go. 70,000 square feet of a facility to be called Exploration Station up by Euston train station. And Allied Irish Banks was going to give them millions. Of course, the problem was the Celtic Tiger went, ooh, and the project got shelved. But at that time, it was all systems go, and so an event was held, and 200 adults were brought along. And 50 children, one of them, my 8-year-old son. And the Taoiseach, or Prime Minister at the time, was Bertie Ahern. Now, whatever you may or may not think about Bertie, one thing was true about him. If he had to give a talk, he typically had practiced. Nothing of the sort happened on the day. I suspect, actually, as he was driving over, somebody said, "There you are," and he said, "Thanks." Bertie arrives and he shakes hands right, left, and center, and then up to the podium. How's it going? D's and do's and dats. And then he starts to read his speech. My son, about as far away from Bertie as I am from the front row here. Not even 20 seconds into the speech, in a voice as loud as this, "Dad, he's really boring." Bertie stopped. The whole room stopped. Who said that? If you saw my son, he was a mini-me. And I couldn't disown him. I did think about it. And as everyone, including Bertie, is looking at me, 3 things occur to me. The first of those is, this shouldn't happen to a parent. It is our job to embarrass our children, not the other way around. In fact, that is a rule. The second thing is, do you know something? He was quite right. And the third thing is, attaboy, you tell him, because I promise you there's no one else in this room that would do what you just did. Now, of course, the moral of the story is when you are speaking, you must always practice. But that's not why I told you that story. You see, Bertie was remembered for the wrong thing that day. And my question to you is, what do you need people to remember? And how can you use story to make that happen? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this story baton is now yours. It is in your possession. What will you do with it? Thank you.